All right, I'm going to call the August 10th meeting of the Macon County Board of Commissioners to order, and I'd like to welcome all of you in attendance. Thank you for being here with us. Got a good crowd tonight, a lot more than normal, and we're very happy to have you. We're going to move right along. First item are announcements. Item A, recognition of COVID call center volunteers and workers. Mr. Manager, I'm going to let you lead the way here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and as the sheriff and Tammy are coming up, I'd just like to start by saying that I think we all can agree, statewide, nationwide, or on the community level, the COVID-19 pandemic presented the greatest challenge and continues to present challenges today. Unquestionably, the greatest challenge that this community, this organization, this county has ever faced. And in light of that challenge, it was so nice, and I've never been more proud to be a part of this community and this county, to see the way that everyone had came together and continues to combat this pandemic to this day. I'd like to first start by thanking those on the front lines, our EMS, emergency management, Sheriff's Department, public health, and healthcare workers who have played such a tremendous role in mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic here in Macon County. Tonight, we're here to also recognize those behind the front lines that played a crucial role in this process. And before we talk about where we have come, I think we first need to remember where we were. On January 12th, in this boardroom, we were facing something here in Macon County that it's safe to say that we have never faced and hope we never face again. And that was a tidal wave of COVID-19 infections. We had just saw the vaccine introduced. We had many people calling into the health department, questioning when they could get tested, where they could get tested, how they get the vaccine. Again, the vaccine had just been released, and it was a time of much uncertainty and much confusion for many. As I said, we've never been there and hope to never be there again. On January 12th, we were receiving call volume into this county of 600 to 1,000 calls a day of people questioning not only when and where they could get tested, where do they get vaccine, how do they get vaccinated. And what that was doing was it was crippling our county-wide phone system. Not only we were facing where the entire phone system in the entire county was shut down for hours at a time, sometimes days at a time. We had people calling with questions about the vaccine that were waiting on the phone for 45 minutes and then would be cut off because the phone system would collapse. And when faced with a challenge, this community, as I said, it came together to overcome this challenge. By January 16th, we had gotten that wait period down from 45 minutes to 6 seconds. Every call would be answered in 6 seconds or less. The first day that we opened the call center, 638 calls came in, all of which were answered in 6 seconds or less. And that is a trend that continued and has continued on through the pandemic. And the result of that is Macon County becoming one of the top per capita vaccinated counties in the state, as people have gotten the information they were requested. And they have gotten those resources. They had somebody to talk to. And this couldn't have been possible without a number of things. Number one, we'd like to thank Mr. Phil Drake, who graciously gave the county his facility at the Drake Education and Training Center. Not only did he give us that facility capable of handling the call volume that we were experiencing, he gave us his equipment, he gave us his staff, and never asked for anything in return. And I'll tell you what, there cannot be enough said about the graciousness and the kindness of Mr. Drake during this pandemic and the way that he has reached out and played a role in us being able to do what we were able to do. Mr. Drake, the county employees stepped up. County employees came in from departments across the organization, donated their time on Saturdays, on holidays, to answer these phone calls and be a resource to the community and direct them whether it be a vaccine or get a test, put them in touch with the right people so they could get registered and the vaccine would be available. We had volunteers that also assisted. We had people that the Board of Commissioners in their foresight recognized we needed to have a budget increase to be able to hire part-time individuals to come in and help with the call center and this large call volume that we experienced. So from where we were on January 12th, as I said, looking at a 45-minute wait time, if you could even get through to somebody at all, to a 6-second wait time, that's pretty dang good. I don't care what business you're in or what you're looking at. And it couldn't have been made possible without all these groups of people and their dedication to public service and their dedication to doing something for their community. We're here today to recognize these individuals that played a role in this call center. And the two standing up here tonight, Tammy and the sheriff, had played a crucial role as they orchestrated the call center and made that happen. They were the boots on the ground that coordinated the volunteers, the part-time individuals, and really made that call center take off. So I can't thank these two individuals enough, nor those of you sitting out here tonight. And as I said earlier, I've never been more proud to be part of this community and a part of Macon County. And I can say with certainty now that while January presented the greatest challenge that we have ever faced, it is because of these individuals, you individuals out here, whether you be a county employee, a volunteer, or Mr. Phil Drake, it's because of individuals like that that we've been able to combat and continue to combat this pandemic today. So with that being said, Sheriff, Tammy, I thank you all so much, and I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Well, if any of you have ever come to a county commissioner and spoke, and especially with a big crowd, which is, the commissioners will tell you is very rare for this room to be filled, there's one thing you want to make sure you do is you don't get up here and say something stupid that you make sense of what you're saying. The second thing you worry about is if anybody speaks before you, you hope they don't say what you were going to say. So having said that, thank you, Mr. Manager. You were perfect in what you said. I've been a county employee for nearly 30 years, and never in my career have I been more proud of the county employees that work for the Macon County. They came together. It was a Friday at 3 o'clock on a holiday weekend that they were called in to step up and help us out for the weekend to take all these calls. We had agencies that came in without hesitation to step in to do that. And we just can't express our appreciation to those individuals for doing that and for coming in, and especially on a holiday weekend. That is really tough to get your family to do that, and we appreciate it. The IT department, the tax department, the sheriff's office, basically every agency in the county played some kind of role in it. And so you're to be commended for what you did, and we just greatly appreciate it. And we appreciate the support of our county commissioners and all our directors of all the agencies to allow us to do the things that we did. So to make sure now that I ripped it up, the only thing that's not on my thing that he said was at this time we're going to recognize and call those county employees or agencies up here to receive a pin. If the chairman would come up with a stand and do that, we would appreciate that. So I'm going to read each of the names, or Tammy is going to read each of the names.
I'll read the names, and we'll let Commissioner Tate give out the pins. So, I'm gonna move over here beside you. Get to those. Kristen Fox. The right hand box, I'm sorry, and then we'll take a group picture afterwards. Jody Brock. Nina Parrott. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
As you can tell, she's the wild one.
Love them.
That's me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Christy Kay.
Stand here.
We'll get Jennifer Deal, Joe Breedlove,
Don't let him talk.
Tommy Allen, Kelly Gravitt. And then we also want to recognize the county employees that could not be here tonight. So we have Michael Stacy, Lindsay Leopard, Kim Green, Andy Muncy, Amanda Nicholson, Caitlin Roper, Katrina Stover, Hannah Anderson, Stephanie Robinson, Sheila Conley, Lori Smith, Nick Nikolaev, I know I messed up that name, and then Zara Diaz Arango, Nick Burchard, and Simon Height. You guys want to join us for the picture?
We'll just stand up behind them, yeah.
Line up here.
Oh, pictures? Awesome.
Thank you, ladies. Don't lose your pens.
Just stand up so they can.
Take that to all and get a cup of coffee.
I always wonder how long I stand here, if everybody would just stand as long as I did. One day I'll do.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're gonna do the next part, right?
Yep.
This is last.
Here's your list of names you'll need to read when you get there. Okay, so next we wanted to recognize the community volunteers who answered our call to attend a meeting to assist members of their churches, their community organizations, or their civic groups in registering folks to get their COVID-19 vaccine, and those who volunteered or became part-time employees at the call center. One of the statistics that the manager didn't share that I want to share is that of those folks that we're getting ready to recognize, they worked a total of 862 and a half hours.
Wow.
They answered between January the 16th and June the 18th. They answered over 23,000 phone calls, of which the majority were to get folks registered and scheduled for vaccines. And they also placed over 20,000 calls for appointment reminders and answering any questions of those that were on the wait list or general questions. And again, it's because of these individuals that the Macon County COVID-19 Vaccine Call Center was successful, and these individuals that worked so hard to meet our community need. As we,
I left you a little something.
you left me a little something. You didn't take mine as much as you did the sheriff's. So Chairman Tate, if you'll come forward again, we'll let you hand out pins as the sheriff calls these names.
Miss Ellen Shope. Jean Pinkston. And we're going to, if you don't mind staying up here, we're going to take a picture. Jim Contz. Did I say your name wrong? Ounce, okay. Maria Green. Sean Kinson. Sean. Miss Darlene Green, who made us cakes every week. I'm the oldest one of the bunch because when we didn't have cakes, I had a birthday every week. So she was Ken Murphy. Uncle.
Come on.
He's the one that drove the farthest distance to work. Where did he come from? Colorado Springs. And Nurse Mandy Buick.
Thank you.
And do you want me to read all these names that aren't here? And we would like to go ahead and recognize the names of the people that are not here tonight. Jean Jordan, Regina Horner, Nurse Christopher Wallace. I keep saying nurse because while they were doing this, they were going to nursing school and then working all day and working all night. Christopher Wallace, Adele Doring, Diane White, Keith White, Brenda Garner, Paul Garner, Gail Ashurst, Randy Ashurst, Carmen Knipple, Ann Nandria, Beverly Mason, Tom Coley, Miss Lee Berger, Tara Reeves, Lauren Martinez, Daniel Waldrop, Diane Day, Charles Motley, Z. Keyser, Isabel Evans, Wanda Clark, and Bonnie Rung. And I think it's important, too, that we also mention the two people, if you'd like to recognize them, the two people from Drake's that Drake's assigned to us.
Terry Breedlove and
Pat.
Pat, our food person who went and got our food for us every day and helped immensely at the call center with any errands, any issues that we had. And so they were great.
Awesome. Let's give them all a round of applause. So if everybody will come over here, and they're going to get along this wall right here with Uncle here and take a photo.
I'm good, you?
Back the video, I'm sorry.
Paul, I promise, we're almost done. I promise.
At least you're not asking for money.
We're not asking for money either this time. The last thing that we want to do is something that's really important to us. Everybody played an important role, but somebody stood out during this event, and we wanted to take time to recognize her. So they've got a script, and it's written big enough I don't even have to wear my glasses. On April 28, 2021, at approximately 10:45 a.m., one of our workers at the call center, Miss Ledford, contacted an 82-year-old Macon County resident, we're just going to call her Miss D or Miss Doe, who had missed her appointment for their second COVID-19 vaccination earlier that morning. The purpose of this call was to see if Miss Doe was en route to the appointment or if she needed to reschedule. Miss D informed Miss Ledford that she was not feeling very well and was in bed. Miss Ledford indicated that she was sorry to hear this and asked if Miss D had someone to help her. Miss D shared that she lives alone and had not contacted anyone to let them know how she was. Miss Ledford quickly noticed that Miss D did not seem to be speaking clearly and was complaining of numbness on her side. Miss Ledford offered several times to call 911 for assistance, and Miss D refused. Upon ending the call, Miss Ledford informed Miss Keyser, the call center manager, who then reached out to Macon County EMS Communications Supervisor Todd Siegel, asking if a wellness safety check could be conducted on Miss D's residence. Miss Siegel recognized the name and Mr. Siegel recognized the name and contacted a family member who authorized sending an ambulance to the residence. Miss D was immediately taken to Angel Medical Center at approximately 10 p.m. that evening. And then later that night on Facebook, we saw a post on Facebook that said, "Thanks to whoever at Macon County Public Health had the wherewithal to realize that my mom was having a medical emergency while talking on her phone. You saved my mom's life." So at this time, we would like to recognize the person that had the wherewithal to make those calls. And at this time, we would like to call Frances Ledford. Ms. Ledford, on behalf of the county, all the department heads, citizens of Macon County, we would like to award you with the Community Hero Award for your recognition for what you did that day. And we just want you to know how much we appreciate you. I saw the family this weekend, and they wanted you to know how much they appreciated you. And thank you so much.
He kept asking if I was going to speak, and I hadn't planned to, but I just want to say that it was a group effort. I feel like we all worked together to help this lady, and I'm so thankful that we did.
Good job. All right. Recognition of our finance department. Mr. Manager, would you like to do that? Would you like for me to?
Sure. I will,
Let's give him just a second here.
okay.
Better hope they ain't lost their touch. A small 10% increase on hospital admission.
All right, Mr. Manager, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll read this news release that was issued on August the 5th, 2021 from the Government Finance Officers Association. Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada has awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting to Macon County for its comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020. The report has been judged by an impartial panel to meet the high standards of the program, which includes demonstrating a constructive spirit of full disclosure to clearly communicate its financial story and motivate potential users and groups to read the report. The Certificate of Achievement is the highest form of recognition in the area of governmental accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by government and its management. And with that being said, I would just like to say, this gets read every year about this time because we get this every year. Because we have the greatest finance department, the greatest finance director anywhere. I'd put them up against anyone, anywhere in the state of North Carolina. They play such an important role in this organization. And Lori, it never gets old reading this, and I just want you to know how much as manager that I appreciate you and everything that your staff does, and we couldn't do it without you.
You got an extra pen?
We'll get one.
Have them stand up, whoever attacked
The finance office.
it. Are they here?
Lori is.
You don't want to hear Roy from the park?
She's got-
I didn't know this was gonna happen.
She's got a speech plan.
Good job.
Go ahead, Roy.
I'm like the sheriff, I was gonna say the same thing, but Derek beat me to it, so. Good job, Lori.
Thank you.
Kudos to you, kudos to your staff.
Very important.
All right, I had requested that our Macon County Health Director, Kathy McGowan, be here tonight to give us an update in COVID. Those of y'all that have been watching the statistics that are generally produced every afternoon, we've seen a spike in cases. But I believe Kathy had a health issue and is going to call in.
She's hurt her shoulder and she should be calling right now.
Okay.
Who's she gonna call?
Ghostbusters. She's calling,
Worked in the past.
she's calling in to the main line right there by the chairman.
Get that, Jimmy. I don't know who that is.
Hey, Kathy?
Hi.
Hey, thank you for calling in, and I'll be quiet and listen to your update if you don't mind.
Sure.
Please proceed.
Okay, so we definitely are seeing an increase in cases over the last week specifically. Over this past weekend, we jumped from under 100 cases to now today we're at 163 active cases. And so I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Hang on just one second. Okay. Can you hear me still?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So yes, we are seeing an increase in cases. You know, we typically run behind most other counties in the state, and we could see it coming. Other counties were getting more cases, and now it's hit us, and we're definitely seeing an increase. We have the only thing is we're not seeing as much of an increase in the request for vaccine, which we wish we would see a lot more people interested in getting the vaccine. So we're dealing with the hospitals are getting their ICUs full, and you know, we're having an increased demand in testing. We're testing at least 4 days a week right now, and trying to see if we can test 5 days a week, depending on the level of staff that we have here at helping us here. So we're trying to meet the demand for testing. Of course, the schools are dealing with getting back to school and the question about masks, and their board meets next Monday, and we'll be addressing that then again.
Okay.
Kathy,
Yes.
this is Ronnie Beal. Do you track of the 163, how many of those are unvaccinated and vaccinated? Did you track that?
We do keep up with it. We're not producing statistics. We definitely have seen some breakthrough cases. Not a lot. When I'm watching it, you know, we'll have a couple, and it's each of the 3 different vaccines have had breakthrough cases. None of the breakthrough cases that we have been following have ended up in the hospital. So even though they're having breakthrough cases, their symptoms aren't as bad, and they're not having a series of health issues with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Any further questions from the board? Kathy, please keep us posted, and if you think there's anything we need to be doing as a board in general to help our community, please keep us in the loop with your team's thoughts.
I sure will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
We'll well, we'll all rise. Is there any other announcements? I'm sorry, before we move on. That was a busy announcement periods.
Mr. Chairman, the county manager and myself will be leaving in the morning. There are some very important legislative items that we'll be talking about in Wilmington. Some of those we'll be talking about here shortly, and there's some other very important things that affect rural counties that's legislative, that's in the legislature right now. So we look forward to representing the county the best we can.
Good deal. If we'll all rise, we'll observe a moment of silence, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Young to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to enter our public comment period. First up is Tom Henderson regarding excessive dog barking. Welcome.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Henderson. Yes, sir.
Thank you. In 2015, I bought about 3 acres of land off of Coon Creek Road. Then I saved every bit of money I could, and in August of 2019, I put a 400 square foot cabin on it and moved into it in November that year. Then in April of the next year, my neighbor obtained coon dogs and penned them up outside. Since then, his dogs have barked for hours at a time. We've tried sitting on our back deck and would have to go inside because the noise was so annoying. It was loud. We could even hear it when we tried to go to sleep inside our cabin with the windows closed. They would bark day and night. I called the sheriff's office. They told me nothing could be done. I called animal control, and they said the same thing. We called into a county commissioner meeting, and they said that nothing could be done. I've also spoken to the county manager, and he said basically the same thing. Neither the Macon County nuisance ordinance nor the animal control ordinance mentioned excessive dog barking. Senator Carl Gillespie researched the matter for me and said that there is no reason why Macon County cannot enforce an ordinance against excessive dog barking. I'm asking that it be included in the animal control ordinance so that excessive dog barking can be stopped. It is not fair for someone to have to put up with that. I'm not against someone having dogs penned up outside, but dog owners have a responsibility to the welfare of their animals and also not to irritate their neighbors with them. They can be trained not to bark. Also, bark collars and other electronic devices can be used to stop their barking. If an officer confirms a complaint, they should be able to enforce the ordinance. My suggestion is to amend the animal control ordinance to be enforced by animal control officers. A violation would be any dog barking frequently for a period of more than 20 minutes. Issue a written warning for the first offense and then give them 30 days to rectify the situation. Then for every offense after that, impose a $50 fine per occurrence, 1 occurrence per day, with no limit. Do not put a monetary limit on total fines. If you do, the problem may not get solved because some people would rather pay the money than fix the problem. Other counties in North Carolina have ordinances against excessive dog barking. So can Macon County. Do not exclude sporting dogs. It is okay for them to bark on the hunt, but not while penned up. I believe many residents of Macon County would appreciate changing the current ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Just for your commissioner's reference, we have several people signed up to discuss this topic tonight, so we might hold our comments unless there's a specific question until we get done, how we might proceed. Okay. Anita Martin.
I'm here to address a problem with a specific commissioner, Josh Young. He has recently bought property in our subdivision, and was sent a notice that we were having a homeowners meeting to finalize the revision to restrictions. And I'm not expecting you guys to do anything about it. It's just something I felt like all of you commissioners needed to know and that the citizens of Macon County need to know. When he called my house because my number and Ann DeHay's number was on the slip in case you weren't going to be able to show or you needed directions to where the meeting was being held. So he called my house and said he had a problem with some of the revisions, and I told him you need to show up then and vote at the homeowners meeting. And I tried to explain to him what the problem was, and he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear why we were trying to get these restrictions revised. We've been working with an attorney, so everything we're doing has been legal. So when I said, when we moved into this subdivision, we all bought here because there were restrictions. And he said, you're the problem. It's you people that have moved in here that are trying to change everything. I was born and raised here, and you people are coming in to try to change things. Well, we were changing things because of problems we were experiencing in the neighborhood. He does not live in the neighborhood. He is selling the house, so he has no stake in what is going on in that neighborhood. But for him to tell me that his rights, because he was born and raised here, are better than my rights, because I've only lived here about 20 years, is total arrogance. And then he proceeded to tell me that we could vote all we wanted to, and then we could take the votes and put them where we wanted to. So in order for him to represent the people of Macon County, that is a terrible attitude. And the arrogance that he shows, and he didn't show up, the rules passed, and there were some that were changed because of people who showed up for the meeting and voiced their opinion. But it's total arrogance for him to say that.
Ms. Martin, I'm going to interrupt. And is this, I mean, I understand your grievance with Commissioner Young, but I don't know if this is the place for you to be.
Where
my
else am I
opinion,
going to do it?
You can take it up with him, but this is a community group for the betterment of Macon County as a whole.
Okay, and for the betterment of Macon County, we need to have commissioners that represent everyone.
Okay, they do that at our elections. And
Right, and I will make sure that the people in Macon County know who he thinks he represents and who he doesn't.
okay, thank you.
Can I make a few comments?
Sure.
Mrs. Anita, have you tried to contact me in regards to this issue since our initial conversation?
No, because you didn't show up to the meeting.
So let's go back. I know there's a lot of emotions right here.
No, we're not going to do this because you wouldn't speak to me. You wouldn't show up at the meeting. And now your buddy here has said that we don't need to do this because they're going to take up for you.
Ladies and gentlemen, all I want to say is you see the issue right here. I've tried to be transparent.
No, you didn't. You started to yell at me and I had to hang up on you on the phone.
All right, Felicia Henderson.
I'm going to let Hank speak for me.
Okay. Welcome, Hank. What is your last name, Hank?
Holly, Halle.
Okay.
Ma'am?
Are you Henry?
I am.
Henry Howell. Okay, I've got you down here, but, so I'm going to take, okay.
Yes.
I'm with you. I'll just remove you off the list.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Frank, how do you spell your last name?
Halle.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You bet. Ma'am, gentlemen, distinguished voters. I like guns. I like God. I like country music. I like monk music.
Amen.
I am a strong advocate of property rights. But I got to tell you, property rights end at the property. I commiserate with this gentleman. I will not go so far as to tell you neighbors, as I live in a litigious neighborhood. I have dogs who are afraid to death of gunshots. They're little pet animals. Lady down the street tells me she can't sleep because of the dogs that bark continually, not for 2 hours at a time, but for 24 hours at a time. And there are not one dog, there are 2 dogs.
There's 4.
Yes, ma'am. There are 4. I grew up a hunter. I understand hunting. I understand hunting dogs. I was a farm kid in Wisconsin. I don't have the privilege, and I consider it that, of having been here 20 years. I've been here 7 months, and I'm not about to tell you how to run your county and how to run your life, so I'm still learning. But the dog problem is severe, and it's continual. And I would ask you to carefully consider little old ladies who can't sleep, pet dogs who are afraid of gunshots, afraid of big dogs that on occasion get loose, and they're massive animals. I put up no hunting, no trespassing, and I'm not for taking deer out of season. I'm not for taking little animals at all. But it's the dogs that I'm here to ask you to give careful consideration to tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Isn't it amazing, Frank, that they can bark and never take a breath?
And I know the seriousness of it. At my age, I know the seriousness of not being able to take a breath.
Yeah, the dogs, but these dogs don't have to take a breath. I don't understand that. They can bark continually
Oh, they do.
and never breathe.
I wish I were in that kind of shape.
I wish I was too.
All right, gentlemen, is that something we want to send to the planning board for review? I don't know if y'all have been watching.
To the attorney, I think we should, Mr. Chairman, I think the attorney should have it, just to see what, because we do have a large hunting population. If those dogs are penned, I'm not so sure. So I'd let our attorney have a look at it, Mr. Chairman, first.
Yeah, I'll let the board make a decision on that. It doesn't matter to me. I don't know if you've watched your emails this past week, the last several weeks, but I've been pretty busy with similar issues. So, but I'm happy with whatever this board thinks best, how to proceed.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, sir.
I think Jack's still here, Jack Morgan back here. When I served on the planning board, when you use the word coon dog, I believe they're protected by law. Jack, right or wrong?
I'm not sure the reference.
We researched it.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked to Senator Gillespie, and the protection is not for coon dogs to bark continuously while in their pens. There's not protection for that. Maybe when they're on the hunt, you can't complain about them barking, because that's what they do.
They can't hunt in neighborhoods.
That's
we
their,
live in a neighborhood.
that's their purpose. But while they're penned up 24 hours a day, and they're barking continuously for hours,
It's
that's
terrible.
not covered. And, I mean, I talked to Carl Gillespie about that. He researched the matter and sent me a huge thing. I forwarded the email to some of you guys. And you can look at that and confirm what I said.
Appreciate it. I just remember there was something about the word coon dog.
There's been discussion about that, and there's a perception about that. But, and there's some things that, you know, you can't control because of sporting dogs. We call them sporting dogs. A coon dog is a sporting dog. So, but it's not covering that particular issue.
Have you made an effort to reach out to the owner of the dogs and?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
you know,
Yeah,
try to-
they moved the pins further towards our house.
And it's, you
Not
know,
only that, but there's the possibility, gentlemen and ma'am, there's the possibility that there are neighbors who claim they have been shot at. There is a junk pile that was placed alongside the road. The possibility of using these coonhounds, these hunting dogs, as a weapon, a weapon of retaliation is there. It's not only are they making noise, but can they be prompted to make noise? And I am one who believes, and many of my neighbors believe, that that is the case.
and just one last thing. If you ignore this issue, it's opening up a possible avenue of confrontation between neighbors. And that can escalate possibly into violence sometimes. And you don't want that to go there. So if you can do something about the barking to start with, you can nip that problem in the bud to prevent that from ever happening.
If there's just a stipulation added into the law that they could bark only on the hunt, that would make a big difference, I think, not in a pen, you know, while they're in a neighborhood.
All right, thoughts? We've got a recommendation by Commissioner Bill to let our county attorney review the issue.
And if you
Thoughts,
read our
second, everybody?
noise ordinance, Mr. Chairman, if you read it close, this is what it says. Loud, unnecessary, and disturbing noise. As used herein, the term loud, unnecessary, and disturbing noise shall mean any noise intentionally created which because of the volume level, duration, and/or character of noise disturbs, injures, or endangers the comfort, health, peace, or safety of reasonable persons of ordinary sensibilities in the county. That's what it says now. So I think what the definitions we'll have to struggle with is what the term excessive, you could put a time limit on it, but that's
Well, the reason I
pretty
brought
hard.
up the time limit is to make it something objective that law enforcement can act on. So the subjectivity of the problem is what's probably holding everybody back. So law enforcement won't do anything because they don't feel like they can. They don't have the authority to do it. Animal control feels the same way. So if they feel that way, then there's something wrong with the wording of either the noise ordinance or the animal control ordinance. Now, I think that it should be animal control ordinance because animal control officers are more skilled at handling problems with animals. And when they go to check on an animal about this type of situation, they can also check on the welfare of the animal and making sure that they are, well cared for. Maybe that's the reason why they're barking, is because they're being neglected or without food or water or something like, or shelter. So I think that is the most appropriate person to leave the regular law enforcement to do the other things. And give them the authority to actually issue a citation or warning, which gives the owner 30 days to get it fixed. Either train the dogs, get some type of device to stop the barking, change something. But after that 30 days, it needs to stop.
All right.
I think it's reasonable.
Any other comments? Let our county attorney review the situation and provide a recommendation.
I'm not real sure what my direction. So, I can review it, but I don't know what it is you want. I do have comments about that I would not want to make in public, that I would like to keep attorney-client privileged as far as dog barking ordinances. I would make the comment that what I've found to be actually what's worked the best as far as clients that I've had is the private civil action against the neighbor, because it makes it less subjective. If they don't hire an attorney, they're going to have orders against them requiring them to button up the dogs, and if they don't, then they can be found in contempt of court. Contempt of court's a criminal charge.
Even if there's no law against it?
Sure, yeah, that can still be.
Well, I don't understand why other counties can enforce these ordinances
No,
in
they
their own
probably-
counties and why Macon County
Well,
cannot.
my comment has to do with the enforcement, and that's the most difficult part.
Yeah.
Because it is a subjective standard, and
Right.
when you start applying subjective standards to laws, that a judge then has to decide based upon oral testimony, it just becomes kind of a crapshoot, and the district court judges are like, okay, whatever. I
That's
don't have time to do
understandable.
that. And so, that's just what I was getting at, and the sheriff can attest that, there's trying to enforce an ordinance as opposed to a state criminal citation is extremely difficult. And so with that, I'll leave it at that, and I'll explain more to the commissioners and, on the attorney-client privileged end of that, just so I'm not making public some of the other issues that are involved in that. But that's what I found that it have worked the best as far as personal clients of mine.
Well, the bottom line is, it's not fair for me to have to stay inside and not be able to enjoy my property that I paid for. I'm entitled to enjoy my property. That's right.
I agree with you 100%.
And that is directly infringing on my right.
Yep.
Not only rights, but the right of peace and tranquility is guaranteed.
Right.
For a reasonable person.
We hear you. We will discuss it later tonight and decide
Thank you.
a way of action. But yeah, thank you all. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. Gene Pinkston.
To look at the masking issue and give some advice and direct in this educational settings as much as possible. My daughter works at a major institution, and I can tell you that 100% of their COVID patients and are quadrupling. So it's not here yet, but we're not in a grandmother to children who are not of age that can be vaccinated, and those rights. But, you know, I really feel, and I ask you to please consider talking about it for all the different departments and for the Board of Education. Thank you for indulging me and being patient with me. And know your feeling, and I would like to think that your feeling and direction would be to encourage them to be cautious. Stages of vaccination.
An interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gene.
All right, anyone else like to address the board? Going once, going twice? All right. Pass this down.
Chairman, if we could.
Redaction, you said?
Yes, 11C.
11C.
Remove, did you say?
Yep.
Sounds like we will be having a closed session.
Mr. Chairman, I have an addition,
In
please.
addition, okay, Lori.
Yeah. Under consent agenda budget amendments, if you could add numbers 32 and 33. I had placed a copy of those on your computer screen.
Received, okay, thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Anything else?
A brief conversation about the Nantahala project. It's not on the agenda, and
Okay, let's put it as, it's under old business, let's put it as 10B.
okay. You staying around for a little while, Jack?
Anything else? All right, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Commissioner Higdon. Second by Commissioner Shields. All in favor, signify by raising your hand.
Aye.
All right, under reports and presentations, a resolution in support of closing North Carolina's health insurance gap. Commissioner Bill.
Commissioners and ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged tonight to have Mr. Casey Cooper. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Cherokee Indian Hospital in Cherokee. He serves, the hospital serves about 14,000 members of the Eastern Band. And Mr. Cooper has been very active in, not only in Cherokee, but in West North Carolina, in working to provide better health care, not only health care physically, but for the mental that we've worked on through the years. So, Mr. Cooper, welcome, and you have the floor, sir. Welcome to Macon County.
Thank you, Mr. Bill, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, for the opportunity to come before you. You've already had a pretty eventful evening, and so I will try to get through this as quick as I can. And in the interest of efficiency, I will just jump right to the punchline. The punchline is that it's my hope that at the conclusion of this presentation tonight, that you'll feel compelled to support a resolution to help close the coverage gap in North Carolina. And I'm asking this for a number of reasons. I don't know if this is available on your screens in front of you.
It is.
Yes. And I'm fully vaccinated. I wanted to be respectful. I understand that you guys are having an uptick in the virus over here as we are in Cherokee. But So on this first slide that you see, that there's some data that I'm going to share with you tonight, the first of which is on this slide. And all of the data that I'm going to share with you tonight comes primarily from three sources. First is some research that was commissioned by the Cone Health Foundation and Kate B. Reynolds Foundation, and the research was actually conducted by George Washington University. The second set of data will come from Georgetown University. And then finally, there's some data in here that's from the governor's task force for closing the coverage gap. So you can see here, this data comes from the Cone Health report. This data has been shared pretty widely across the state, and to my knowledge has not been contested or questioned by anybody. But it's estimated that in Macon County, about 21.7% of your working non-elderly adults are uninsured, and that closing the coverage gap could lead to providing coverage for about 1,300 of your citizens, creating about 62 jobs and about 169,000 in county revenues and about 10 million a year in new business activity. For the Eastern Band, we feel pretty confident that we've got about 1,000 individuals who are working adults who would qualify for expansion if North Carolina were to expand, and that represents an opportunity cost for us of about $7 million a year. Actually, it's more than an opportunity cost. It's an unfunded expense that we have, and I'll explain a little bit more about that to you a little bit later. The $7 million a year the Eastern Band is funding, it should be funded by the federal government, but it's not. The Eastern Band is funding it, and that's $7 million a year that the Eastern Band could be investing in regional initiatives such as housing, infrastructure, broadband, jobs creation, et cetera. Again, you can see that the counties in western North Carolina are disproportionately affected by the lack of coverage for working adults, and Macon County is at 21.7%, and that puts you in the top 15. You just missed the top 10, but not by much. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is there's this horrible coverage gap for folks, and so if you make a little bit too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but you don't make enough money to qualify for the tax incentives on the exchange, then you fall in this gap where coverage is completely unaffordable. It's just not affordable for folks. And so you can see in this table that if you're an individual, let's say you're a single parent with a couple of kids, and you work in environmental services, or you work in food service, or if you're a laborer, you are in this coverage gap and you cannot afford to buy health insurance on the exchange. And too many of our mamas in western North Carolina are taking care of babies that have Medicaid, but mamas don't qualify, and these mamas don't have coverage. And I'll show you a little bit more data in a minute that shows you that women are disproportionately affected by this. So this is what it looks like when you fall in the coverage gap. You could have, you could be making minimum wage and have annual earnings of about $13,000 a year, but you're in that coverage gap. You don't qualify for the tax credits or the incentives to have affordable insurance on the exchange, and you make too much money for Medicaid, so you're just stuck. And I know you guys are familiar with this. I know that I'm sure all of you have friends and family and neighbors who don't have coverage right now. And if they're in this income bracket, they are one accident or one chronic disease or one acute illness away from bankruptcy. It's just the reality of it. So one of the misconceptions about closing the coverage gap is that the folks that are uninsured are too trifling to work, and it's simply not true. The data clearly demonstrates that the majority of folks that are uncovered are working. Unfortunately, they're working and they're working poor, or they're working for cash, or they're doing a number of other things where their income just doesn't make it possible for them to provide coverage for themselves or in some cases their families. You can see that the uninsured, they represent all different sectors or all different industries, with the highest proportion of them being in food service. And I don't know if you guys are feeling this in Macon County, but over in Cherokee, we are struggling to even get folks to work in food service right now because the wages are so low, and it's just difficult. So in this graph, you can see now, we're switching now. This is some data that came from Georgetown University, and you can see that even though African Americans represent somewhere around 25% of the state's population, they are overrepresented in some of these sectors, but they do not represent the majority of the uninsured. And you can see, with the exception of manufacturing from this graph, that it is white working folk who represent the largest proportion of the uninsured. And when you look at this data by gender, you can see that with the exception of administration, support, and waste management, women represent the largest proportion of the uninsured. So that's why I say it's most of the time it's mamas who are taking care of babies who still have Medicaid. They got their babies covered, they're getting well child visits for their babies, but these mamas are going without coverage. And it's also veterans. Unfortunately, North Carolina has 7% of its veterans do not have health insurance coverage. And this is another misconception. A lot of people think that if you're a veteran, you have coverage, but if you don't have service-connected eligibility, you really don't have coverage at all. So another thing that this lack of coverage does is it puts a horrible burden on counties and your jails and your sheriff's departments. And I know that you guys know this. This is some data from Care for Carolinas. It may not be exactly what you're experiencing currently, but we know that providing health care for your inmates is a terrible, terrible financial burden on county budgets. And it's estimated that Medicaid expansion could provide a tremendous amount of relief or alleviate this financial burden on the counties in providing health care for inmates. Other folks that are disproportionately affected are those folks that struggle with mental illness. And I have permission from my friend Albert Hartline's son, Troy. I want to tell you a little bit about Albert Hartline just a second. In 2006, Albert Hartline was inducted into the Jackson County Hall of Fame. Graduated high school with Albert, and he's the first state champion in wrestling in the Jackson County school systems, the first person to win a state title. Several months ago, Albert struggled with depression until he finally took his own life after shooting his neighbor. In the 8 months prior to this happening, Albert had been admitted to the hospital 9 times and had been released within 72 hours, all 9 times. And Albert spiraled into the depths of depression because he was diagnosed with cancer and he had no insurance coverage. Several years ago, he called me on the phone and he said, "Coop," that's why he always called me. He said, "Coop, I need some help." He said, "Man, something's wrong with me bad." He said, "But I can't afford to go to the doctor." So I called Steve Heatherly, the CEO at Duke LifePoint, who's my friend, who we went to school with. And Steve said, "Tell him to come on to the ER. We'll take care of him, and we'll do our best to get his care paid for through a charity care program." So he went into the hospital. He got diagnosed with cancer. And he never went back because he had watched his dad go bankrupt fighting colon cancer. His dad had over close to $500,000 in bills and basically bankrupt his mom and his daddy. And Albert knew that was his fate. So he went into this downward spiral of drinking himself to death until ultimately he took his own life. And I believe that he is a victim of not having health insurance coverage. And he was a hard worker. This was not a lazy guy. This was a guy that was disciplined, worked hard, worked for a construction company. The other thing that closing the coverage gap does is closing the coverage gap will protect your small rural hospitals. 82% of the rural hospital closures nationwide have happened in non-expansion states. This is no secret to any of us, and you folks have done an amazing job of fighting to keep your hospital. You've done a really good job of trying to protect your health services for your community, and closing the coverage gap would certainly help. And I know it's clear, it's obvious, but here's the reality of it. Rural hospitals operate on very thin operating margins. Many times their margins are negative. And the difference between having a negative margin and a positive operating margin is just a few covered folks. The more folks you can bring into your system that have health insurance coverage are more people that you can use to offset the loss you're going to have from the uncompensated care. And rural hospitals are on a razor's edge. So here's another misconception. You know, there's another misconception that the state of North Carolina can't afford it. You guys may have heard these themes, but here's the reality of it. There's 1.2 million people in North Carolina who'd qualify for Medicaid if North Carolina expanded. And that cost at about year 3 would get up to about $5 billion a year, 90% of which would be paid for by the feds. There's a 90% federal match for the expansion population, so the state burden would only be 10%. And the state has already identified through a number of different ways that it would fund that 10%. Through premium tax collections on the health plans, now that we've got Medicaid transformation and you've got all these PHPs managing Medicaid, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for revenue from premium tax collections, hospital assessments, other types of assessments, and hospital offsets. This is not uncommon. You can see in this slide that 5 of the states managed to cover 100% of the state's 10% match through different types of assessments. And the data is pretty clear. And North Carolina's already mapped out a way that it too could cover 100% of the state's 10% match. So it's clearly affordable. In addition to that, there's the administration is estimating these offsets. So 56 million offset in mental health because you'd have more people that had Medicaid, therefore there'd be fewer folks using your state dollars, using your state Medicaid dollars. You'd have savings or increased revenue from the tax premiums, and you would have savings. It's estimated $10 million of savings in your public safety budgets across the state because your inmates, more of your inmates would have Medicaid. So in addition to that, not only does it appear that it's affordable into the future, but now is exactly the right time for North Carolina to expand because there is an additional $1.7 billion worth of incentives for the state of North Carolina if it expands Medicaid. And here's how that works. In one of the stimulus packages that just passed, there was an incentive for all the states that have not expanded, and the incentive is an increase of an additional 5% match on your current Medicaid population. So in North Carolina, I think the state match is 67%, so that would increase by 5% on your regular Medicaid. That increase by 5% is estimated to be $1.7 billion over the 8 quarters following expansion. And that $1.7 billion has been estimated to cover the state's share for 6 years. That gives the hospitals and the health plans 6 years to ramp up and to be able to pay the assessments that would offset the state's burden or the state's share. So there's no question about it. It's not only is it affordable, this is exactly the right time for the state to do it. So another concern that you'll hear folks say, well, what if the feds go back on their word? What if the federal government decides it don't want to fund that 90% in the future? Well, anything's possible, but it's not likely. This is language directly from Section 1905 at 42 U.S.C. 1369. This is the Social Security Act. So when the Affordable Care Act passed, and it guaranteed the match, and you'll see here, and you can see in bullet number E, that the match that is guaranteed to the states is 90% for the calendar quarters in 2020 and every year thereafter. So is it possible that the feds would decide not to fund this in the future? It's possible, but it, of course, would literally take an act of Congress, and it would require an amendment to the Social Security Act. So the 90% match is just as guaranteed as the Medicaid program itself is. Okay. So that's the first part of the presentation. I'm going to pivot now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cherokee Indian Hospital System, and I'm going to tell you why this is so important to us, and I'll try to get through this really quick. So as Mr. Beal mentioned to you, I'm the CEO of the Cherokee Indian Hospital. We're about a $100 million a year organization, about 700 employees, and we've got locations in Cherokee and Graham and Cherokee County, Swain County, Swain County, Cherokee, and Graham. And one of the things that we just completed was a $45 million crisis stabilization unit. It's a 14-bed locked facility with 4 high acuity beds. And when the tribe made the decision to build this facility, there were a couple of things that it acknowledged in building this facility. Number one, it acknowledged that it would have to build it with all tribal money. There's no federal money available to do this with and no state funds. Number two, the tribe committed that it would have to fund the operating expense until Medicaid expansion passed. because the majority of the population that need these services are below 100% of the federal poverty level, and they are adults. So the majority of the folks that we're talking about that struggle with behavioral health and substance use disorders would qualify for Medicaid expansion. So the tribe acknowledged that it would have to provide the capital and the operating funding, and the tribe also directed us to overbuild the facility, if you will, so that we had expansion capability in future years. So we forecasted our demand for the service. We estimated our demand. We took our demand all the way up to the 75th percentile of what our average daily census was, and we built it at 14 beds, and we have available capacity now. We could be a regional partner to the counties in western North Carolina right now and take some of the burden off your sheriff's departments and take some of the burden out of your emergency rooms right now if those folks had coverage. We provide a lot of other behavioral health services. I'll skip through this. This pie chart that you see just shows you the proportion of our total gross revenue that is represented by net patient service revenue. And the reason that we are so dependent on Medicaid revenue is because the Indian Health Service, a little small agency within Health and Human Services, the Indian Health Service is only funded today at about $4,000 per capita. That's less than the annual expense per capita for inmate health care. Okay, so $4,000 per capita for the entire Indian Health Service. Congress acknowledged this and has acknowledged this by making it possible for Indian health systems to bill Medicaid and Medicare to supplement their budgets. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But why is there an Indian Health Service to begin with? Well, this is a map of the original Cherokee Nation, and many of you have probably seen this map. But in this map, you can actually see the land that was ceded or lost to the United States, or in some cases even to the King of England, in 36 successive treaties. And down at the bottom at 6 o'clock on your map, you see the Treaty of New Echota, and that was the last treaty between the Cherokee Nation and the United States that ceded the remainder of the land. Many of you are familiar with that, and you know that Macon County was a significant portion of that remaining tract of land that was ceded in the Treaty of New Echota in 1838. There were treaties like this that were entered into with tribes all across the nation, and in more than 22 of these treaties between tribes in the United States, the provision of health care was negotiated as recompense for the genocide and the loss of land that took place. That's why the United States has a legal and moral obligation to providing health care for American Indians and Alaska Natives. And it is further memorialized through a long legislative history, and I won't go through all this with you, but there's a very detailed, long legislative history beginning in the treaty period and then kind of founding with the Snyder Act of 1921 all the way through provisions in the Affordable Care Act. But here's the most important part of it. There were two amendments to the Social Security Act, Congress carried out, if you will, and that was in Section 1911. Congress actually gave the Indian Health Service the authority to bill Medicaid and Medicare because the Indian Health Service was so horribly underfunded. And this was Congress's intent to try to fully fund the need. And then later, Congress amended the Social Security Act again and guaranteed the states 100% federal match for all of the Medicaid expense of treating American Indians and Alaska Natives, so there's no burden to the state. Now, let me back up and underscore this for you. I mentioned to you earlier that by not expanding Medicaid in North Carolina, it's costing us $7 million a year. And that $7 million a year would cost the state nothing. Because of this amendment in the Social Security Act, the feds would reimburse the state 100% of that amount. Okay? Okay, so I'll just kind of wrap up here. Again, we have about 1,000 patients that are below 138% FPL and that do not have coverage. It's costing us about $7 million a year. It would cost the state nothing because of the FMAP, and barriers to enrollment do not decrease demand in our system, and it doesn't decrease utilization or cost. The Eastern Band is actually funding this burden. So let me just wrap up by summarizing those three misconceptions that I began with. The first misconception is that taxpayer dollars will be spent on childless, able-bodied adults who choose not to work, and it's not true. The data proves it. most of these folks are working. Another misconception is that the state match is unaffordable and not sustainable, and that's simply not true. The state match is certainly affordable. As a matter of fact, there's a clear path forward to not only generate an additional $1.7 billion in revenue for the 8 quarters following the expansion, but there's also a clear path forward to fully fund this without any increased cost to the state at all. And then finally, the 90% federal match might go away, and in the absence of an amendment to the Social Security Act, that's simply not true either. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time, Mr. Bill, and for the opportunity. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Cooper, I've spoken with Senator Corbin about this, and he told me the counties that had passed it, that he'd already received resolutions from. Can you reiterate which counties those were?
Yes, this presentation has been shared with Swain, Jackson, and Haywood. Swain and Jackson passed the resolutions. Haywood has it on their agenda this coming month at their next meeting, I think.
Graham had?
I'm sorry, and Graham actually passed it more than a year ago.
And Cherokee has it on there. But just to reiterate what Mr. Cooper said this week, talking about veterans, so we had a veteran in the ER for 4 days. He was not service connected. Really nowhere to go. That was just the veterans. We have another veteran there tonight with 3 other folks in our ER. They will all be sent for 72 hours and come home. They'll be given a pamphlet and sent home. They'll be dealing, if the sheriff was here, would tell you that they'd be dealing with the same problems. We do have some programs available, but to have this facility, Mr. Cooper, that not only serves as the Eastern Band, but can serve our region. For instance, Haywood County has 15 beds. To my knowledge, Macon County has never had an opportunity to use those 15 beds. Why? Because they're occupied by local residents. And so this problem, that's just the edge of it. And I also talked to Senator Corbin and some other folks. And you know, I think 38 states now have Medicaid expansion. They see what we see.
Right.
And that's one of the things we're going to be presenting Saturday morning in Wilmington, is we cannot compete with these metropolitan counties.
Right.
Rural counties, when you go to the quota system for healthcare, we're out of the loop. So if this would help us provide for our folks, and it will, the statistics show that, and we think it's got a real good shot, as does Senator Corbin, of coming to fruition. So we hope for our folks that we all represent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Chairman? Mr.
Great
Hagan?
presentation, just the wrong audience. This resolution, as most resolutions we entertain, is not very meaningful at a state level. Closing the gap, expanding Medicaid's been a topic for many years, as you well know. And I think it's a decision that will be made at the state level. One thing did catch my attention. You said that the 10% would be the 10%, federal government picking up 90%. No new Macon County taxes, but that 90% is revenue from a tax somewhere. The 10% would be made up by a small assessment on healthcare providers, which you are one, and hospitals. And you mentioned they're working on a razor-thin margin now. How will that, and then you said that the 10% in your presentation would be revenue from another source.
All right, so let me attempt to kind of address all 3 of those. The first one is, I thought I was hearing you say that the 90% has to be covered by taxes from somewhere, and you are correct about that. As a matter of fact, North Carolina citizens are already paying that tax. This won't result in an increased tax to North Carolina citizens. As a matter of fact, at this time, all 50 states are paying taxes, but there are 12 states that are not benefiting from the taxes that they're actually paying in the federal system. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the 10% state match. The hospitals in North Carolina already pay assessments. The hospitals choose to pay an assessment because it increases the state's match and it makes it possible for the state of North Carolina to pull down a larger amount of federal dollars. So the hospitals already do it. Now, it is proportionate, the amount of assessment they pay. So if you've got a small rural hospital that's on a thin margin or a negative margin, they're not paying an assessment. The majority of the assessments are going to be paid by the larger health systems.
What's your standing with the state? Have you made this presentation to the state, the people who will actually be, that have
Yes.
voted on this numerous times?
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I'm sure you're aware that the House actually passed a bill, House Bill 655, I think, in 2019, that actually proposed to do just this. Unfortunately, it didn't make it out of the Senate. So there is bipartisan support in the House, and at least in 2019 for this. And I think you bring up a good point, Mr. Higdon, why this audience? Well, I think it's important at the grassroots level that we provide our local representatives with some support and some input, and we let our preferences be known to our elected representatives. So if it was this body's desire to pass the resolution and provide Senator Corbin with the direction and the cover that he needs to go to Raleigh and advocate for something that may be unpopular in his party, but he needs to know where his constituents stand. And that's the intent for being here.
Good presentation.
Yeah.
You've done this before.
So I don't really want to start a debate, but I do have a couple questions in regards to the Medicaid. And like our hospital now being a for-profit, like the layman